In the sleepy town of Elmwood, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests in upstate New York, lived Eleanor Hargrove, a woman of 62 years with a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. She had married late in life, at 50, to a widower named Harold, who brought with him a grown son from his previous marriage. That son, Marcus, was 38. A brooding man with a history of failed jobs and broken relationships. Harold had passed away 2 years into the marriage from a sudden heart attack, leaving Eleanor the sprawling Victorian house on the edge of town and a complicated relationship with her stepson, Marcus. Eleanor had never been maternal. Her own life had been one of independence, running a small antique shop in town, collecting oddities from estate sales, and keeping people at arm's length. Marcus, however, saw her as an intruder, a gold digger who had swooped in during his father's twilight years. He resented her for inheriting the house, the savings, everything. But with no job and mounting debts, Marcus had nowhere else to go. Eleanor, in a rare moment of pity or perhaps calculation, allowed him to stay in the guest room upstairs, under the condition that he helped around the house. The first few months were tense but civil. Marcus fixed leaky faucets and mowed the overgrown lawn, while Eleanor cooked sparse meals and managed the finances. But beneath the surface, something darker brewed. Eleanor noticed how Marcus looked at her sometimes, not with hatred, but with a hunger that unsettled her. No, that wasn't right. It was she who began to see him differently. At 62, Eleanor felt the weight of loneliness, the emptiness of a life without passion. Marcus, with his strong build and quiet demeanor, became an object of fixation. One evening, as rain pounded against the windows, Eleanor poured herself a glass of whiskey in the dimly lit kitchen. Marcus sat at the table, nursing a beer, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You know, boy," she said, her voice laced with mockery, "you're not much use to anyone. Your father spoiled you rotten." Marcus looked up, his face flushing. "I'm not a boy, Eleanor. And you're not my mother." She laughed, a low, throaty sound. "Thank God for that. But you live under my roof, so you'll do as I say." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder. It was meant to be intimidating, but the touch lingered. Marcus stiffened, but didn't pull away. That night marked the beginning. Eleanor, emboldened by the alcohol and her growing sense of power, cornered him in the hallway. "You owe me," she whispered, her fingers digging into his arm. Marcus, confused and weak-willed, submitted. It was abuse cloaked in consent, but the power imbalance was clear. She was the authority figure, the one with the keys to his shelter, his survival. Days turned into weeks, and the encounters became routine. Eleanor would summon Marcus to her room late at night, her demands growing more insistent. "This is your rent," she'd say, her eyes cold. Marcus, trapped by his own inertia and fear of homelessness, complied. He hated her, but a part of him was numb, dissociated from the reality. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd find a job and leave. But Eleanor's grip tightened. She controlled the money, the food, even his outings. "Where do you think you're going?" she'd snap if he tried to leave the house. Eleanor reveled in the control. For the first time in years, she felt alive, dominant. But it wasn't just physical. She belittled him constantly, reminding him of his failures. "Your father was a real man," she'd taunt. "You're just a shadow." Marcus's self-esteem plummeted. He stopped looking for work, stopped calling old friends. The house became a prison, with Eleanor as the warden. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers in the attic, Marcus found letters from his father's first wife. revealing Eleanor's manipulative past. She had driven a wedge between Harold and his family long before the marriage. Anger surged through him, but he kept silent, biding his time. Meanwhile, Eleanor began feeling unwell. Nausea in the mornings, fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. At first, she dismissed it as age, but a home pregnancy test confirmed the impossible. She was pregnant. At 62, it was a miracle or a curse. The father could only be Marcus. Panic set in. How would she explain this? The town was small. Rumors would fly. But more than that, she saw an opportunity. The child could bind Marcus to her forever, or better yet, serve as leverage. She confronted him that evening. "You're going to be a father," she said, her voice triumphant. Marcus stared in horror. "That's not possible. You're old." Eleanor's face twisted. "Watch your mouth. This is your doing. You'll take responsibility, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a monster you are." Marcus backed away. "My doing? You forced this." She slapped him hard. "Forced? You enjoyed it. Don't play the victim." The abuse escalated. Now, with a pregnancy as her shield, Eleanor became more demanding, using her condition to guilt him into submission. Marcus felt trapped in a nightmare, his mind fracturing under the strain. As Eleanor's belly swelled, so did the tension in the house. She paraded her pregnancy around town, claiming it was a late-life blessing from an anonymous donor. A lie that raised eyebrows but wasn't questioned too deeply. Marcus, confined to the house, grew increasingly desperate. He started keeping a journal, documenting every incident, every threat. It was his lifeline, a record of the truth. One night, during a particularly violent argument, Eleanor pushed him too far. "If you leave, I'll tell the police you raped me," she hissed. "Who do you think they'll believe? The poor old widow or the deadbeat stepson?" Marcus snapped. He grabbed her arms, shaking her. "You've ruined my life," she screamed, and he let go, horrified at his own rage. But Eleanor saw her chance. The next day, she called the police, bruises on her arms from his grip. "My stepson attacked me," she sobbed into the phone. "He's been abusing me for months. I'm pregnant with his child." The officers arrived quickly. Marcus, caught off guard, tried to explain, but his journal was hidden, and Eleanor's tears were convincing. He was arrested on charges of domestic violence and sexual assault. The pregnancy test, combined with her accusations, painted him as the aggressor. The trial was a spectacle in Elmwood. Eleanor took the stand, her belly prominent, weeping about how Marcus had forced himself on her, how she feared for her unborn child. "He threatened me," she claimed. "Said he'd kill us both if I told." Marcus's lawyer argued coercion, but without witnesses, it was his word against hers. The journal was introduced as evidence, but Eleanor dismissed it as fabricated lies. The jury, swayed by her age and apparent vulnerability, found Marcus guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As he was led away, Marcus looked at Eleanor one last time. She smiled faintly, her hand on her stomach. The child would be born free of him, and the house, the money all hers. Epilogue. Eleanor gave birth to a healthy boy, naming him Harold after her late husband. She raised him in the Victorian house, spinning tales of his heroic father who had died tragically. The town pitied her, admired her resilience. Marcus rotted in prison, his appeals denied. In the end, the abuser had become the victim in the eyes of the world, and justice was a twisted illusion.